Qualys has brought together vulnerability management and patch management, letting security teams discover vulnerabilities and apply patches immediately, all within a single, unified app. Sign up for a free trial of Qualys VMDR, vulnerability management, detection, and response today at securityweekly.com/Qualys. FlexTrack is the platform that helps cybersecurity practitioners get the daily work done. Red teams can create reports in half the time and track risk to resolution with the blue team. Teams can centralize remediation efforts across all scans, assessments, and audits. Effectively communicate risk in real time through simple visualizations, scanner and ticketing integrations, and robust analytics. FlexTrack is perfect for collaboration across all teams. Visit securityweekly.com/FlexTrack to claim your free month. The biggest problem in security that remains unsolved is flat networks inside the cloud and data center that allow threats to move laterally and compromise vulnerable targets. But microsegmentation using traditional firewalls is too complex and time-consuming. There's a better approach: Edgewise Zero Trust Auto Segmentation. Edgewise is impossibly simple microsegmentation. Using the identity of machines and software that are communicating, Edgewise offers the strongest protection that adapts automatically to changes. Protect any application in any cloud without any changes to your network by visiting securityweekly.com/Edgewise. Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. If you have a guest suggestion or topic you want us to cover on one of the shows, submit your suggestions for guests by visiting securityweekly.com/guest. Complete that form, and we'll review them at some point at our leisure. We try, but I don't want to make any promises.
Come on, the script says monthly.
I know what the script says, but that's not reality. In October 22nd, there'll be a technical training providing a first look at a new free resource that delivers thousands of remedies as a service to bridge the gap between vulnerabilities found and vulnerabilities fixed, not to be missed. October 28th, learn how to build an integrated security platform on our webcast at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Visit securityweekly.com/webcast. See what we have coming up or /on demand for the previously recorded ones. Now we're on to the security news. Where do we want to start? We talk about Bluetooth. I feel like every couple of weeks there's a new Bluetooth vulnerability.
There is. Like,
what is?
There's been this
You've got
huge
like
resurgence.
so many course updates to make just in the past couple of months. You must be like, what the heck?
Oh, and we had a whole bunch right before that too.
There needs to be like a Bluetooth Patch Tuesday right now.
It feels
right?
like
They just need to like build them all up.
Tuesday's taken. They need to pick another day.
Bluetooth Thursday.
Okay, sounds good.
And give Larry, you need pre-access to those so you can build them into your class so that's there before they come out.
Yeah. Now, which story was this of yours?
I thought I added my last one, number 17, actually links to the GitHub repository from Google. They found 3 vulnerabilities. This is the most critical of them all. To speak to our first segment, right? It is severity high, according to Google. It is CVE 2020 12351. They're dubbing it bad karma heap-based type confusion, aka BleedingTooth.
Yeah, and this one, I think this one is great because specifically Bluetooth Classic, it looks like.
I believe so.
Yeah. Yeah,
we'll read the proof of concept line for line that's written in C.
No.
No.
Yeah.
No.
So it looks like Bluetooth Classic, which is amazing in that it's so Bluetooth is given. When we look at the protocol stack, we have this HCI effective proxy to all of the fun stuff you really want to do with wireless, like RF baseband, packet framing. So like if you want to tell your Bluetooth adapter what channel to be on, you need to interact with the RF controller. If you want to craft a packet to send into the air, you need to talk to the baseband and the packet framing, rather.
And HCI is like the interface?
But everything, the first 3 layers of the OSI stack effectively are abstracted by the HCI layer, layer 4. So if you want to craft a packet on a specific channel with these features in this packet, you have to send it to the HCI layer, and the HCI layer is basically like, no, you just tell me what data you want to send, and I'll handle all that stuff for you. We'll broker all that stuff for you. The fun part about this is it's L2 cap, which is above the HCI layer, which is typically all the stuff that users are interacting with and that type of stuff. So, yeah. Fun. Fun. So you're talking at layer 5 here. This hasn't even begun to really get more exploration into Bluetooth Classic stuff from layer 1, 2, and 3, which is terrifying because so much of that is abstracted, and there's few tools out there that are either cheap or readily available. The Ubertooth 1 being one of them that is cheap and readily available, but it's very much a developer tool. If you want to do something new, you're spending some time with some code.
And this is Linux kernel 4.8.
Yes. So they said what their test was on Ubuntu 2004.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. You're running Ubuntu 2004 over there, right?
I am, actually. And
RM-RF/.
How are
Not
you gonna
anymore.
prioritize this, Paul?
my Bluetooth is turned off now. So
And why is my mouth not? Why does my mouse not work?
I'm actually
I don't
not using a Bluetooth mouse, but was interesting. My Bluetooth was turned on because I was like a couple weeks ago, and I just never turned it off.
Yep. The following panic has been observed on Ubuntu 2004 LTS.
It is my platform of choice for Linux. And really kind of, I just think it's kind of interesting that while this vulnerability is very interesting, and I do link to the proof of concept code that you can review in there, it doesn't get any nerdier than that with respect to this vulnerability. But I think it's interesting, just the number of Bluetooth vulnerabilities that go across both low energy and classic. Recently, we've covered 4. This is like maybe the 4th or 5th one we've covered in the past few months.
Yeah, for the amount of time that Bluetooth Classic has been out, I'm very surprised with the number of attacks that have come out recently. Meaning that it's really sort of stood the test of time.
Yeah.
We saw a bunch when they first came out. Many of them were academic, like attacking the ciphers and some of those types of things, largely because it was just so difficult to interact with Bluetooth at layer 1 or layer 2. So I think many people just ignored it, and we're finding now that we've done a much better job over the network, so we have to look for non-traditional approaches that are available on so many things now, and Bluetooth's where it's at. So.
Hey, I got a prioritization question. Given that we're all working virtually these days, how much of a priority should people place on these Bluetooth vulnerabilities?
Well, this one in particular is specific to Linux. It's probably I'm like the anomaly, right? Running Linux on my desktops. Most people are either Windows or Mac OS, right? So now let's include the other Bluetooth vulnerability. So I would say in this respect, Jeff, probably not a huge priority because you probably don't have a lot of Linux desktops in your environment, right? IoT devices, perhaps, that are running Linux with this particular kernel version are probably more common and likely susceptible to this. So that you might want to pay attention to, and the priority is going to depend on how you're using those IoT devices and where they are in your network.
I think I know where sort of Jeff is getting at, is that so little of us now are commuting or going into an office where you'd have this centralized attack surface for all of this Bluetooth stuff in enterprise. It's significantly more widely distributed. If it were me, I'd take a good look at the priority. But for me, given that where I live and where I work out of my home, it would be pretty obvious if somebody was within range to be able to attack some of my Bluetooth stuff. Just because we have trees and line of sight really isn't all that much of a thing, and you'd be parked at the end of my driveway.
I don't think these are high priority because if I'm going to attack someone or a computer, right? There's so much other attack surface I'm going to go after, and sure, I could gain a foothold and then take advantage of the Bluetooth stack on what I've compromised and maybe compromise other Bluetooth devices.
I wouldn't even say use it as a pivot to other devices, and I know Tyler's got one, but use it as a pivot because those things are going to be likely network connected at some point,
and likely not patched potentially.
And even if they are, and you exploit the Bluetooth, and you have some overflow where you're getting remote code execution, you just have that thing do a callback to you in some way, shape, or form, and now you have a point in beside the network for pivot. Yeah,
I think ICS, nation state attacks, might prioritize this one a little higher, but that's a smaller percentage of you need to be focused on zero login, a lot of other things you should fix before you get this.
I think one of the big things to think about is like Larry was saying, like that pivot point from a chained attack standpoint, and take like really horrible Android or iOS or web apps that are controlling all these IoT things, like all these Chinese lights that are, RGB that everybody's using, your latest, IoT talk to something in the shower kind of device. Like there's all these devices that have some sort of web app available, some kind of API that may be exposed to the internet, where you're hitting that and then trying to bounce from that to, say, a corporate device that may be within inside of a home network because it's a work from home situation. I think there may be more novel attacks like that, and there may start to be some automated or toolkits that kind of leverage those things. But like you said, this is a much lower probability than, the 5 million other ways that you can get hacked.
Yeah. Now, the only thing I will say when you talk about zero log on and those types of things, they require some sort of network access. Potentially already, you're on the network, you've done some social engineering. This one, you don't. You're standing in the parking lot or a block away with potentially line of sight to a building, an apartment building, an enterprise.
Yeah, now it's an apartment building. That's what I was talking about, right? This attack surface and opportunity changes now, because you don't have these offices where all the employees are going into the office and consolidating all of their vulnerable Bluetooth devices or what have you, and you're using social engineering to get in, maybe dropping a device off. We talked about that in the start of the show, right? That's largely what we would do if we did a physical pen test. That was our goal: get in, drop some device, and then do my hacks. That's when I might leverage a vulnerability like this if I want to be stealthy and get into these devices. Now, today with COVID, I'm curious to see, and everyone working from home, how that attack. It's not even the attack surface, right? It's your attacker opportunities now change significantly.
Yep, and I think for this one, it comes down to availability of detection of some of this type of stuff. I mean, if regardless of where your device is, and home makes it even more difficult potentially. Home or in the office, and we have the ability to leverage these attacks with some high-powered, readily available Bluetooth devices and a long-range antenna. If you have clear line of sight, you could potentially do these attacks from over a mile away. And how do you find someone that's a mile away that's shooting packets at the air?
But I like your apartment building analogy. I think that's sound.
So do that from a mile away towards an apartment building where you've got somebody like in the Seattle area that may be working for Microsoft and or Amazon and or all the other tech companies in that area. Those are just two that come to mind. But then the question is, where is your detection for Bluetooth, RF, layer 1, layer 2, layer 3 attacks? So layer 1, layer 2, layer 3, we've got TCP/IP and that type of stuff. But where is your detection for layer 1, layer 2? It doesn't exist, especially for Bluetooth.
So the range you said really could be up to a mile?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
For Bluetooth Classic.
Bluetooth Low Energy as well.
And Bluetooth Low Energy as well.
Yep. You have a Class 1 100 milliwatt Bluetooth dongle, the Pirani Sena UD100. Don't ask me how I know that, because that's what the device we use in
class.
617. Yep. Is the strongest output power at 100 milliwatts. Typical average distance is about 100 meters. But it has a removable antenna, and you go put that to like a 12 dB Yagi.
So you add
directional.
some dB to that, right?
Yep, and the classic story of the Bluetooth sniper rifle. The Bluetooth sniper rifle folks did a Class 1 device on the sniper rifle and connected to a Class 2, typical range of 10 meters, phone, and initiated a pairing connection and request and completed over a mile away.
That was in controlled conditions.
Wow. Yes, so it was clear line of sight. Yep. But if you think about two apartment buildings in a metropolitan area, it's clear line of sight and less than a mile away. Yeah, distance is a thing.
So from a priority perspective, given that a lot of the nefarious hacker activity that goes on is still targets of opportunity, it's somewhat more challenging to just drive around your neighborhood or to pick a neighborhood whether you have prime conditions and you're a mile away or less than a mile away, to find something juicy that you're going to exploit and pivot and do all that kind of stuff. Although I think it is an interesting perspective that Tyler brought up, that with so many people working from home now, with they're on their local area home network that's got all of their various IoT devices connected to it. If you knew where somebody lived and knew that they worked for a particular organization and you knew that they had something that you might want to steal, that certainly raises the bar.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yep. Cool.
Zoom has come out with end-to-end encryption.
Didn't they already have end-to-end encryption?
Only if you paid for it.
But did they?
Now it's free.
But now
Did
they release it?
Then they did.
No. Though they said they
said
they had end-to-end encryption, but that end had a point in the middle, so it was end to end to end to end, and there was a spot in the middle where it could be decrypted. So
it was end to middle and middle to end, and in the middle it wasn't encrypted.
And it wasn't turned on by default. I think you had to turn it on, and then it was only encrypted from my Zoom client to the Zoom server. But then somebody else connected Zoom client to the Zoom server. But what happens in
the middle?
Yeah, in the middle there.
False marketing is what Threat posted. They say after backlash over false marketing.
Yep,
I think that's accurate. I think that's respectable journalism. I wouldn't disagree with that. I think it was false marketing.
It'd be interesting to see how they accomplished that.
Well, what was it when we used to use Pigeon? Was it Jabber?
OTR.
OTR off the record,
OTR.
right? That was true. Like we had to exchange keys, and it was true end-to-end encryption. So they would have had to do something like that.
That got replaced by something like Signal.
Yep. And PGP also in terms of messages, but then also Zimmerman did Z phone, right, which was true end-to-end encryption as well.
This is true.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about it from that angle, but Larry's raising an interesting point from an encryption perspective. How are you getting multiple endpoints to all be encrypted, talking to each other, or watching or listening a show? That is an interesting question.
And so, admittedly, I think what bad marketing or whatever it was, false marketing, I think it was really that they didn't understand really what end-to-end meant. I mean, sure, it was connected to both ends.
They understood the challenge to truly implement it. Like, I can market it like this.
I don't know. I don't
think Zoom expected to be in the spotlight like they were.
No.
Once COVID broke out, and so I don't.
Well, it's a good news, bad news scenario for them, because they've got a whole lot more customers now.
Right.
I'm sure overall it's been a good thing for Zoom, but I mean, even whatever they call it, I'm assuming they're just using TLS type of encryption.
They bought a company called Keybase, right? Remember Keybase? We covered that actually, and the article speculates to a certain degree that they're using that technology. So the next week's rollout, Zoom's E2EE offering will use public key cryptography, which means that keys for each Zoom meeting are generated by participants' machines as opposed to Zoom's servers. So pretty much exactly like we're talking about with OTR. Right.
And effectively,
maybe.
And effectively, I'm assuming it comes from their acquisition of Keybase.
Yeah, which was solid. It was solid.
Yeah,
encryption technology from everything that I heard and read.
Yep.
Yeah, but I now I want to see the details, because I mean, our web browsing starts with public key cryptography. That's what certificates are, but it ends up being, you do that to exchange a symmetric key so that you can get the speed of fairly quickly loading websites and things like that. I would have to believe that they're doing something similar, but you've piqued my interest. So now
it says that encrypted data relayed through Zoom servers is indecipherable by Zoom,
which would imply that they're doing an end-to-end key exchange.
Correct.
But I'd still be surprised if they're not all sharing a symmetric key
like a group
after
key
they do some kind of handshake.
Right, because it's not just one to one; it's many to many, basically.
Yep.
in the Zoom room if you've got basically more than 2 people.
Boom, boom, boom in the Zoom room. Oh, every time you say that.
It's an interesting cryptographic problem.
It is, for sure. I don't know where to segue from an interesting cryptographic problem, but unless anyone else does.
If Lee's,
Barnes & Noble had an incident.
When
late breaking.
When Lee's audio was working, we have a great story I think I want to discuss with him. But the Barnes & Noble one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't have any insights other than I saw the article. Yes, they had a data breach. It leaked customer data. I think it's kind of interesting.
It had something to do with their Nook.
Did it?
The article that I posted is talking about it was initially it impacted their Nook.
It did, yeah.
Services.
Nook readers were access was interrupted according to the report.
Okay, so as far as what got disclosed, I don't know, but I know we had one of the Barnes & Noble loyalty program cards where you got discounts and so forth. But of course, we haven't used it in forever because we typically buy through other venues, and there isn't a Barnes & Noble handy to us anymore. But she got the disclosure notification in the via email the other day saying, "Hey, something got compromised." So why would you send that to all of your loyalty card customers if that data wasn't exposed in some way? Because we don't own a Nook and we never have.
Interesting.
So what's interesting to me, and I don't know if you guys know it from the article that whoever posted it. I actually did a PCI assessment for BarnesandNoble.com many years ago. And gosh, that was probably 15 years ago. I think I was actually at TrustWave at the time. When TrustWave was still cool. And they were actually, BarnesandNoble.com was separate because that was their e-commerce offering. It was separate from their brick and mortar, separate business unit at least. I forget the business details, legal details, but because they had built their e-commerce offering from scratch and they had done it kind of later after the .com bust, they were actually one of the most PCI compliant companies I ever dealt with out of the box because they were exclusively an e-commerce site, and so they knew that they were going to get hammered, so they did a lot of the security stuff that they knew they needed to do anyway. Shout out to whoever used to run that program if they're listening. But I'm curious whether this attack was focused on BarnesandNoble.com, their e-commerce offering, or if it was more their brick and mortar side of things. Because it's Nook, I'm thinking it's probably leaning more towards the e-commerce side. But
details
are. If it's actually a web app or if it actually was a backend database. Because if it's a backend database, I would explain kind of the loyalty piece where there's going to be different customer access and there's going to be different tables. And if it's coming through Nook, then that means it's going to have a hook or tie into its ability to do the front end commerce and access the inventory of the back end as well. So I'm kind of curious where, who's handling this incident and kind of where this is going to end up as far as their customers.
Yeah, and what are we going to learn in the future about this attack? Because details are kind of light, right?
Yeah.
Very light.
This one seems interesting because of the fact that they exclusively refer to Nook in a few different ways. So, is that a back-end side or is that through the device? There's something there.
I wanted to talk about the article I had that was 5 signs that point to a schism in cybersecurity. Hopefully I said that word. Schism? I knew I was saying it wrong.
That's okay.
Some pretty cool quotes in here. Don't worry if it doesn't work right. If everything did, you'd be out of a job. Mosher's Law of Software Engineering, which is kind of interesting. But in the article...
Was this the one we were talking about at dinner?
This is the one we were talking about over dinner. So in the article, it states, doing cybersecurity correctly requires enterprise-level organizations to, and we get a list. I want to get everyone's opinion on this, right? The first one, acknowledge publicly that cybersecurity is a top priority for the organization.
Yep.
I have two.
You want buy-in?
I have issues with 2 words in that. And at dinner, I only had an issue with one word, and that one word at dinner was top. Now I also have issue with publicly.
Yeah, right?
Say the
So it's kinda
statement one
weird.
more time.
Acknowledge publicly that cybersecurity is a top priority for the organization.
Is this like a Alcoholics Anonymous kind of like admit you have a problem first, or you got support?
Like,
first?
hi, I'm an enterprise level organization, and cybersecurity is a top priority for me.
I was
It's
trying to
kinda-
draw a parallel to when I first came out into the private sector many years ago, trying to convince companies that in terms of you need to take security seriously, it needs to be from the top down. We used to recommend that the CEOs of companies would put out an actual document or statement. We called it a charter, saying. And of course, we didn't call it cyber back then, but we're going to take data, internet, information security seriously. That's something we do. So I don't know if it needs to be public. I don't know why. Was that one of the words you
publicly?
Publicly.
Yeah.
I see Lee's lips moving, but I can't hear him. I really want Lee to weigh in on these things. I'm kind of stalling to get. We want Lee back.
Put it in the chat or the Discord, Lee.
Right. So the second thing was hire a chief information security officer who answers directly to the CEO, not the CIO, because there could be a direct conflict of interest if they report to the CIO.
I'd argue that maybe there's also a conflict of interest with the CEO.
I think it depends. Largely, I mean, we talk about this at nauseum on Business Security Weekly, right? And largely it depends, right?
Yeah.
Because you can have a CISO or a CIS. They do call out Chief Information Security Officer, right? Which would lead me down the path of this is for the IT security side, right? And we do see a lot of roles where there's a CISO that is interfacing with customers. There's a CISO for the product security, and then there's a CISO for the IT things. And those are really three different roles. So I don't necessarily disagree with this. I think that it's going to vary per organization, but your CISO roles should report to people that, as best you can, don't present a direct conflict of interest. Jeff?
I see it a little bit differently. I'm not so hung up on what you call the position, and I'm not so hung up on who they report to. I'm not so hung up on conflict of interest. Whatever you call it, wherever they're reporting, they've got to be able to. They got to have teeth. They got to have power.
Agreed.
Right.
But I think that's the first 2 points, right? Like,
Hey, it's Lee.
Acknowledge that you're gonna give a high priority to, not necessarily top priority, but you're gonna take security seriously, right? I think the word culture I would probably put in there.
But
somewhere.
in that respect, Paul, almost the last person in an organization, and apologies to anybody out there that's a CEO, the last person I want to go to for clout is the CEO, because they typically don't understand this business. They know the dollars and cents, and they know the bottom line.
They're more the business person. Yeah.
But they're not necessarily, well, and we could debate on whether whoever you're reporting to needs to get it, or do they need to trust you in whatever role you're in,
right?
That you know what you're talking about, and you're empowered to make judgment calls and make the CEO have a strong password, use two-factor authentication, not
lead
share
by
it
example.
with its executive assistant. We don't call them secretaries anymore, and so on and so forth. So to me, it's still, you got to empower the person. They've got to, if they say something is good or bad and something needs to be stopped or halted or delayed, people got to know to listen to them and take it seriously.
Yeah,
that to me is the bottom line.
Lee, you're back.
Yes, I'm back.
Yay.
So I've seen some cases where it does matter because, like, cybersecurity reporting to the CFO, that you become a cost center. Not so cool.
Yeah.
If reporting to the CIO can work if the CIO values cyber, but because you're enabling IT, you're already on the same page, so you have a potential win there. But you're right. You go too high up, and you're not talking their language. It's not going to work. Or you have a dual report.
Right.
I mean,
I like
in our
that model too.
organization,
Yeah.
we sit under the CIO, but we also have a dotted line to the deputy director, the number 2 guy in the organization. So, and when we need him to say, "Thou shalt do this," he has the clout to make it happen, enterprise-wide.
Yep, I like that. So yeah, I mean,
She now, excuse me.
I was going to say he or she.
Yeah. So that was one of my struggles when I was in the unnamed CISO role that reported to the CIO effectively, was that that thing that you're deploying now is full of holes. No, you can't deploy that. No, you got to go fix those problems. I know it's going to delay your project by 6 weeks. And my boss, the CIO, would say, "Nope, we're doing it anyways because we got to have that because that is mission critical."
Yep.
But your mission critical is Swiss cheese. Well, it's mission critical. We got to have it. We don't have it now, but we got to have it.
And speaking to your previous role, Larry, the third one ties into this whole discussion, right?
Yep.
The third point is hire a team of cybersecurity professional. The fourth point: allocate a budget slice. Adequate slice of the budget to procure and manage the security architecture for the entire organization that is required to be updated periodically. For example, maybe every 5 years on average. 5 years might be too long, depending on which project you're talking about, right? But what we're saying is a commitment to security, a role that can enact change, the ability to say no. Jeff, to your point, I think has teeth is a great way to put it. And you've got adequate budget, right? I think those are three critical things we can all agree on. Maybe not the exact wording that's in the article, which I think the person did a great job writing this article. But those three things, I think, are things we come back to and we can all agree on.
And adequate budget is subjective.
Yes.
The 5 years is subjective. But I think the real commitment here is you're going to need money to support both your soft and your hard costs.
Yes.
And you're going to have to spend money continuously in a continuous rotation to improve that.
And people is part of that.
Yes,
and
that's your soft
I guess that kind of ties in. Maybe I would have slightly changed the order, right? Hire a team of cybersecurity professionals based on experience more so than degrees and worthless certifications that were earned 15 years ago.
You know, what I would like to see, and I'm not sure what you would call it, but I would like to see a role that takes the business side into account, takes security into account, and properly acknowledges that security is somehow wrapped up in a cost of doing business. And what I mean by that is, having many PCI retail customers over the years that would bitch and complain about all the security stuff that they had to do. And especially at a retail location, when it was a brick and mortar, and I'd be like, I understand your pain, but I remember being a young person where I would go to a store and buy something, and the clerk had to, in the early days, they had to pull out a little magazine, like newspaper type of thing, and flip through it, and it had lists of all sorts of credit card numbers, and they would actually look.
I remember those.
And see if your credit card was listed as a bad card. Now that evolved to, they would turn around and get on the telephone, call an 800 number, get on the phone with a live person, read off the card number, read off the amount of the transaction, and wait for the authorization code. That would take on a good day 3 to 5 minutes. And I'd tell these retailers, like, that was what you came from. Now you've got people running through the line. You've got these point of sale systems where they swipe their cards, and in a few seconds you're getting that authorization.
Efficiency is not free.
Well, the efficiency and the fact that they're moving so many people through the line more quickly.
Now wait,
so they
Jeff,
have
did they physically cut your card if it was invalid, or is that just in the movies? There's a scene in Hackers, right, where they attack the FBI agent and they literally cut his card in half, like right in front of him while he's on a date, right?
Well, to be honest with you, Paul, the reason I'm familiar with that little booklet thing is because my family, when I was a young kid, we owned a retail store, and I, as a kid, I used to, get summer job. I would go work at the store, and so I would be the one looking up the cards. And the instructions were you were supposed to
cut the card.
take the card, confiscate it, cut it, not give it back to the customer. Not that ever happened, but that was what the instructions were.
Right,
Yep.
right.
So yes, that's not a myth.
So moving on the list, Paul.
Let's see. Implement a robust risk management framework for starters, and I think that the qualifying words there are for starters, which is very good, that aligns to NIST Cybersecurity Framework, NIST Risk Management Framework, SP 853 Revision 5, specifically ISACA's COBIT, CIS Top 20, ISO 27001, PCI DSS, for good measure there, Jeff, or something other than the usual makeup as we go. We don't have a plan, BS that fails eventually 100% of the time.
So
it's a pretty
yes.
interesting take on compliance team.
So
here's
what's wrong with that statement, and this is just my opinion. Most of what I'm glad that they mentioned PCI at the end, but most of what they're mentioning, initially in terms are frameworks, and
frameworks, not standards.
They're not standards, and PCI is arguably more of a framework than a standard, but that's another topic for another day. But to lead with those things assumes that you've got people that know how to read them, interpret them, know how to apply them to your environment, know what matters, know what doesn't matter. Right. Most organizations, they don't have the people that can do that. They're looking for just tell me what I need to do.
But you're supposed to be hiring a team of cybersecurity professionals based on experience more than degrees. So
I'm talking about the cybersecurity professionals, maybe the ones with degrees, not
well,
experience.
I think he said certification. More so than degrees and worthless certifications. But he does qualify that. But I think I'm going to read between the lines a little bit, right? If you earned a certification 15 years ago and haven't updated it, but it's on your resume, one could see where you would perceive that as worthless, right? And they give heavy weight to experience over the certification, which I think is right. And I think it's phrased, kind of very interestingly to kind of knock the certification systems that are out there, which I don't think is necessarily fair. I think they do have their place, right? But I can see the point where if it's 15 years ago, obviously, we need to take that into consideration, and it hasn't been updated. Degrees is also very subjective as well. If you're first starting out, you have a degree in cybersecurity or you don't, that may be something that might qualify you. However, go back to the first point, where he says hire a team of cybersecurity professionals based on experience. One could argue a degree and/or certification gives you some experience as well.
Yeah. And
quick question. I'm sorry, Larry.
No, go ahead.
I'm curious what your take on this, because this came up, I think, on Security Compliance Weekly, or at least made me start thinking about this in the last couple weeks. When it comes to certification, do you view certification more as a reflection of or validation of experience, or is it more of a training vehicle to teach you something?
I look at it not 100%, right? Because I think it depends on the individual. However, when I see that someone did go get a certification, it speaks to their commitment to want to be in this field. They're in a degree similar, right? They've embarked on a journey and completed that journey because they are committed to be in this field, and that's just one data point.
Your choices were reflection of experience or teaching and training. How does your answer? Is your answer option C?
My answer is still it depends on which degree and/or certification. Some speak more to gaining experience than does just having that degree or certification. So it depends on what level and which type of degree or certification that they have. In general, Jeff, to answer your question, I would say it's more so speaking to the level of training that they have, not experience. In general.
Yep. And go ahead, Lee.
I was going to say, I think I'd weight that a little bit. Some of the certifications actually have experience requirements, and you have to have peer validation of that experience.
OSCP, I think it requires you have a really high degree of training, which also kind of speaks to some experience to pass that certification. And Lee, I think you're referring to sans higher level certifications, which do require that someone vouch for you to reach those very higher levels in the sans certification programs, right?
And go ahead, Larry.
I would also say CISSP is in that realm too. We can have an argument all day long about the value of that, but it's one of those cases where you need to have someone vouch for your experience to go down that road. 5
years or something like that.
Yep.
I remember having to add it up, and so are the ISACA.
Yep. Now,
the ISMs, those ones have experience requirements. We can argue about the value, but I'm just saying not all of them are just pass the test.
Yeah.
Yep.
I would say,
and I guess to clarify, sorry, Tyler, to clarify, I think what I'm asking is, when you hear that somebody has a particular certification, do you automatically think, oh, they've got experience, or do you tend to think, oh, they've passed a test? And I would agree, it probably very much depends on what particular certification you're talking about.
Yeah, I would say largely it's that they've passed the test, that they've done that certification.
They passed the test,
does not speak to experience.
Pass the test.
I think there's a different.
Pass the test and they learned something, but what have they done with what they learned?
Yes,
Tyler.
Agreed.
Tyler.
The cert gets you the interview if your resume is not able to stand up to the experience sniff test. If you have to prove that you're at a point because you don't have the job experience for the role that you're applying, a certificate can come in and say, like, I've done some training around that. However, you're really trying to get those certs to get the interview, to get that experience where your resume can stand on its own.
If you're at a certain point, I think if you're really, if you're looking to hire someone and you're really astute about hiring someone into cybersecurity, give you an example. If a candidate has a GitHub repository, a blog, and lists some of the presentations they've done at conferences, and there's a candidate that has degrees and or certifications, I would interview both those people and give them an equal fair chance in the interview process, because to me that's equal clout to get you in the door, in my experience. And which candidate you hire is going to depend on your interview experience. So I don't want to say that you have to have a certification and degree to get in the door. Not what I'm saying for cybersecurity at all. I think if you got a GitHub and you got a blog and maybe you've done some presentations, that is more than enough for you to get in the door to get an interview, at least with me, right?
Yep. And now I kind of derailed us on the human side and the certs and the degrees. From Jeff's original question was, or comments were along the lines of, I don't think folks have experience and or knowledge about implementing some of these frameworks. And I read between the lines of this question is pick a plan and try it. And if it doesn't work, try another plan. But pick a plan that you think might work for your organization and build that organizational experience to have a plan and to know where you should be going.
Start somewhere.
Start somewhere.
Yeah,
Start somewhere.
Agreed.
And you don't reinvent don't invent the wheel, because the wheel has been created several times over. Just those wheels, those monster truck wheels aren't going to fit on your Ferrari.
Yeah.
I agree with what you're saying, Larry, and thanks for the clarification. But what I'm essentially saying is, some high percentage of companies out there have to do PCI anyway. It's been around a long time. Start with that.
Sure, agreed.
All the things
on the
that
list.
have come, all the things that have come since then, the CSF and the RMFs,
risk management framework. Yes.
Yeah.
All of those things, they're either everything in the kitchen sink, and you're expected to know what pick out what applies to you and do it, which is where I think they become problematic. PCI for everything that's wrong with it in terms of the way people fail to apply it correctly. It's the basic security controls that you should be doing in your organization to cover anything that you care about. So substitute credit card data for whatever it is, the data that you care about. And it's a pretty good model, and chances are you have to do it anyway if you accept credit cards for payment for goods and services that you provide. Why go beyond that? That's my contention.
The last point in this article was, have your cybersecurity professionals create a business continuity plan and disaster recovery plan. Now, when Larry and I talked about this point, we talked about an incident response plan as well. And I think we agreed, Larry, that it is, in fact, a separate thing. And we would probably add that to this last point in the list to do business continuity, disaster recovery, and incident response, and that they tie into each other, but are three separate activities.
Right. And agreed.
Yes,
and I wouldn't necessarily say your cybersecurity professionals should be the ones creating your BCP and your DRP.
Not by themselves.
Definitely not. And I would argue that project should be left elsewhere because your security professionals have plenty of other things to be doing.
Yep.
But certainly they should have some input, because in many of the things you're having to deal with, like I go back to my HIPAA days, that if you migrated your data to your backup site for your disaster recovery plan, it had to maintain the same level of security in your backup site that it did presently. So you need your security professionals involved in that process. Arguably, your security professionals should be developing their incident response plan, and that incident response plan may say, hey, in times of crisis, we need to refer to these other chunks of the plan that know how to bail us out of this environment. Oh, we got ransomware. Well, maybe we need to fall back to our disaster site. Go do those things. We've lost these assets because they've been hacked and they're under investigation and blah, blah, blah. No, what do we do to replace those with business continuity? And I see them being referenced in that incident response plan, but I don't see them being created by those cybersecurity professionals.
I want to give credit to PrivSec guy. I don't have the person's actual name. He goes by PrivSec guy on Medium, and that's the article that we were referencing, and it gave us some great talking points. And I thought it was a great article. By the way, I don't think we're knocking the article in any way.
No.
Just great talking points.
No, I mean, we had a really good conversation based on it, so thank you.
That was cool.
There is another article.
There's definitely one of these I want to hit.
So just along the lines of like good articles, this one was titled "Shift Happens: 3 Hard Truths for Transforming Your Cybersecurity Program." This one was written by David Scott, also published on Medium.
I gotta go take a shift.
Yeah, right. I kind of read it that way as first, right?
Shift happens.
But what did I say his name was? David
Scott.
Yeah. David says, as cybersecurity professionals, red teamers, blue teamers, researchers, CISOs, or however we may classify ourselves, we have 3 mission objectives: protect humans, including their data, enable the security exchange of information, and do the right thing. I thought it was kind of an interesting statement that is, in bold in the article as the first truth, trying to define the security trinity. Do you folks disagree? Agree? Some points, all, maybe some?
I love that it leads with the humans. There was a time in my career I would not have led with humans, but without them, it's already missed the point.
It's truly, I think we kind of focused on protecting the network, protecting the systems, protecting the applications. To Matt Alderman's point, when we talk about today, we got to protect apps, users, and data as 3 kind of separate entities, right? But I think the do the right thing is implied in that. We do the right thing, but we protect the apps, users, and the data. I think that's something that we can all kind of, come to agreement on, that's our mission.
Right.
That's defense
I
in
can
depth,
agree with it at a certain level, but it's also ambiguous enough language that it could. I mean, I read it almost like a horoscope. Oh wow, that's me. In most commercial organizations, protecting humans, and maybe I'm going to sound a little curmudgeon-y and cynical for a moment. Protecting humans is not necessarily the first thing. It's the revenue and the bottom line and making your numbers and all that. And when the noise about you're killing people becomes great enough that it's impacting your bottom line, then it becomes. And I'm not talking strictly cybersecurity. I mean, I was a kid and I drove around in cars that didn't have seatbelts. I used to go to the beach in a station wagon where they'd throw a blanket on top of the suitcases in the back of the station wagon, and that's where I would get to hang out and sleep and whatnot. I was a torpedo ready to launch if we ever had a front end collision. But you had the mom
sounds
good,
right?
It sounds good, but I disagree that protecting humans is most commercial companies' first thought. I mean, think retail. You're selling women's clothing. You're selling underwear. You're selling stock. You're selling. You're a grocery store.
Lee?
Maybe grocery store. Go ahead, Lee. I'm sorry.
I mean, what's missing from that truth number one is supporting the mission of the organization.
Agreed.
I just think humans are first, but absolutely, this all is about making the business successful. If you don't make the business successful, what's the point? I secure computers that are absolutely tight but can't do work. Hello, I missed it. Same time, if I make the humans not able to function, I miss it again.
And see, I thought Lee was going to say if I make the humans tight.
I was that close, Larry. I just fell short.
Yep.
David has some interesting thoughts on compliance. He says it's a commonly abused profanity in our world. In his opinion, a double-edged sword. He says we as security people often use it as a fancy, politically safe replacement for because I said so. And much of his article is focused on security professionals embodying trust, integrity, and credibility rather than using compliance as a crutch.
That makes me want to get him on Security and Compliance Weekly.
Yeah, right.
I think we'd have a good conversation.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting kind of take on compliance and how that intersects with trust, integrity, and credibility. If you don't have those things, I almost feel like you have to, fall back on compliance, and that may only get you partway through your journey. I'm not saying it's not important, but it's not going to get you all the way there. You have to build trust, and have integrity, and build credibility with the organization, and that's a two-way street as well, right? I mean, you could work your hardest to build that trust and build credibility, but if the organization's not behind you, I mean, it's just going to fall short.
I also feel compelled, in the off chance that he's actually listening to this episode, and in hopes of getting him on Security and Compliance Weekly, it's really easy for us to pick apart what he's written here.
Absolutely.
I think what he's written here is very compelling.
Agreed.
I mean, we're pen testing right now. We're doing the easy part.
We're picking it apart.
We're picking
right?
holes and stuff.
Yep. David doesn't have a voice here, and we should give him a voice. I agree, Jeff.
And that goes for every article that we talk
absolutely.
about. So, but yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah.
I thought those were two very thought-provoking articles, whether you agree or disagree with anything or some of the things in those articles. They're worth a read because they are thought-provoking, and I agree. Open invitation to both of the authors of those articles, and huge thanks for that thought-provoking material.
Yeah.
Lee, do you have some stories that are that you would like to cover in terms of news?
Oh, my number 9.
Yeah, Trickbot. Yeah, let's do Trickbot.
Oh,
Okay.
He said number 9, but either way, whichever.
It's okay.
Trickbot first.
Trickbot.
Yeah, let's hit Trickbot. And when my browser comes back, I can play along in the home game.
I want to read, while you do that, Lee, I just want to read something about Trickbot that I thought was really super interesting in the way Microsoft was able to go after Trickbot. It was basically a trademark infringement. Like, Microsoft is basically saying, and I'll summarize the Krebs on Security article, which is very, very good. Basically, the summary is Trickbot changes the way that Windows behaves in a negative way. Therefore, users may perceive that Microsoft Windows is behaving in that way, not under the influence of something like Trickbot. Therefore, what do they say in the article? Diluting and tarnishing the value of Microsoft and Windows trademarks and brands, and made it about protecting the trademark and the integrity of the trademark because it was infected with malware. I thought that was really interesting. Tyler?
Microsoft limiting its liability, right? Like, they're just crossing their T's, dotting their I's, because they have to have some kind of court order in order to take down and collaborate with all of these different servers and vendors in which they're doing.
But Tyler, Microsoft's not doing us a disservice by taking down Trickbot either. 100%. They are doing themselves a service, but also as a side benefit, doing the world a service.
This is something that not just Microsoft. There's entire groups that many of these large corporations kind of collaborate, and working groups in order to kind of provide value to the public at a cost to some of these bigger companies. Microsoft being one of them. Walmart does some of this. There are big companies out there that are doing services and tracking this at their own costs and their own budget.
But also the U.S. government, U.S. Cyber Command carried out its own attack. And
that
basically,
part is interesting.
Yeah, took over the command and control and told them to disconnect themselves from the internet.
Yeah, the command and control piece is very interesting because that reflects some government intervention in conjunction and collaboration with several. It's not just Microsoft and not just one large corporation to do this. And there had to have been some serious value, and I think there was some critical assets that they were trying to fight and battle, in which this was a good service for the public, but this also has some strategic advantages to other things because it's not taking down the entire TrickBot. There's still backup comms using
sure, but could Tyler, could the authors of TrickBot have a case and sue the U.S. government for violation of CFAA?
I think that's why Microsoft stepped in and had the legal coverage, right?
Yeah, the trademark was legal coverage for that, right?
Yep, and the collaboration with the U.S. government to make that happen. Like I said, even if they didn't take it down long term, like there's redundant comms in there. Like the enum DNS stuff is, it's not the first time that we've seen that used, and there's other ransomware that uses it. So they will be back up and running, but they obviously took down some strategic command and control servers, I think, that had other implications that may not be relevant or public. Intel 471, those guys are phenomenal. They have some great visibility and they have some amazing research. The kind of analysis that they provided is very, very accurate to what a lot of the not public or disclosing companies are seeing around other botnets. There's other IoT botnets that are doing a lot of the same activity, and they cause a lot of damage, but they're not highly publicized. So this particular piece, the reason it's publicized, and I think the reason it got taken down was because it had high visibility. And it had some other alternative motives that maybe there was critical things that they needed to address. And
I think the argument is that TrickBot was already violating the CFAA first, and therefore taking it down was a law enforcement action that basically absolves them, right? Like, yeah.
Yeah, they need to have that court paper in order to show up at a data center and work with that company in order to take it down.
Yep.
Yeah. But there's countries that a lot of the command and control servers are working out of. They're not going to be or comply with these particular court orders. So, like I said, there's backup comms and there are servers within inside of companies that are not going down. So it didn't really limit as much traffic as I think the public would want to see. But I think there's some strategic backing for why they went after this particular one.
Basically, TrickBot's a pain in the ass, and we should work together to take that crap down, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think when they do this, like I said, there's other working groups and there's other like botnets that are being tracked. They're trying to understand TTPs, understand what the targets are. So these companies and groups that are doing this at the cost of corporate dollars, I think are a great asset to the community. And I kind of wish it would be a little bit more public where they could get a little bit more credit for what they do. There's things that happen in the back that a lot of people don't know and don't ever get to see.
We have not talked about the bad neighbor TCP/IP bug yet on the show.
Oh, one packet to pwn them all, right?
We talked about this actually on Enterprise Security Weekly. John Strand recognized McAfee's write-up as being very, very good in terms of this. John's recommendation was basically like, look, patch this. And I was like, but wait, John, like some of the analysis I was reading was that right now it's a blue screen of death. Going from blue screen of death to remote code execution is a stretch. John's counter to that was Microsoft said basically it's remote code execution, and we're probably already there.
They know more than we do.
Groups, right? So either you need to disable IPv6 entirely. John did caution that can have negative impacts on things like Office 365, break stuff within the Microsoft environment. There is another PowerShell workaround that we covered that disables the specific functionality within IPv6 on Windows systems that renders this bug essentially useless. Also, the patch right, is the way to go about this, right? And I believe the patch has been issued, but whether you're getting remote code execution or just crashing the system, this is bad. I think the advice, Jeff, to your earlier question, my advice on this one is just go patch it, right? Like my Windows system was like, hey, I got updates to install. I'm like, I'm doing a show right now. I'm like, can you wait till the show is done? As soon as the show is done, yes, go restart, apply those patches, because it's super important. It is a network RCE, basically for Windows. Rapid7 did call this out as, we've seen things that can cause BSODs, and it takes a long time before we get to remote code execution. But I'm reading between the lines here going, someone's going to figure this out if they haven't already. So make sure you go patch your stuff.
Yep.
Yeah, I think there's a delta between somebody's figured it out and we know somebody's figured it out because
Agreed.
there's an exploit out there. And we've all alluded to, those of us that are pen testers, having certain things in our bag of tricks that maybe we haven't necessarily shared with anybody yet, and we're the good guys.
Yep.
The Internet Storm Center blog had a good blog post explaining what all the Rudder advertisement messages were for IPv6 and so forth. Their TLDR right at the top of the post: do not disable IPv6 entirely unless you want to break Windows in interesting ways. This can only be exploited from local subnet. It may lead to remote code execution or blue screen or death. The proof of concept exploit is easy, but actual remote code execution is hard. Patch.
Yeah.
Say no more.
So I'm curious,
Say no more.
IPv6 though, right? Like they're saying it's only within inside of the local network, and I haven't went through this one all that closely, but IPv6, especially in firewalls that are not configured to handle IPv6 properly, traverse networks and NAT. So,
Well, that's because technically there's no private addressing in IPv6.
exactly.
There is, but there isn't.
There's link
how does that apply?
local, which is, I don't understand it closely enough to.
Where the hell's Joff tonight?
I know.
Joff would be able to weigh in.
He's out of pocket.
Straight.
Yep.
We'll have to bring
But
this
I
up
think
again
what
next
Tyler's
week.
saying is, even though it's internal, it's technically a publicly reachable address.
Yeah, I'm curious. I'm actually pulling some code down. Like this seems like, from a standpoint of like, this is bad. Yeah, you should patch this. But now I'm curious as to, like, if someone has a POC and they've looked into this, can this be pushed out via a scan across the internet, hit those firewalls that are no longer, that don't handle IPv6 properly, and now you've got internal access with remote code execution, or just crashing a system that may be a critical system from the
Tyler,
internet.
wipe your mouth there. You're salivating a little.
Salivating. I agree. I mean, because there's a patch for people to reverse engineer, and there's a proof of concept. If remote code execution is possible, someone's going to figure it out.
And now I'm
Or
really
they
pissed
have
off 'cause
figured it out.
my computer blue screened right before the show, and now I'm like, about to wipe
Son
it.
of a...
You're pwned, dude.
Son of a...
Sorry about that, Tyler. Just adjust my code a little bit.
Yep. I think we need to bring this up again next week when Joff can comment for us, and after another week of analysis has been done.
Yeah,
I think would be a
definitely.
fantastic idea.
Lee, do you have
talk about home.
Yeah.
The hackers can claim access. They have access to 50,000 home security cameras. Basically,
Yeah.
a group is exploiting insecure cameras. They say they have 3 terabytes of clip with scores of members that pay $150 for a premium membership, $150, and they have a sample with about 4,000 videos. The thing that got me under my skin on this one is that a bunch of these videos are of kids in their room changing their clothes or doing other things where there really shouldn't be a video feed on the internet, and it got me really kind of
You raised your
pissed
hackles.
off.
Yeah, raise your hackles.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'll be honest. I posted in the Slack channel. I don't think I could keep my calm while talking about this story.
Yep.
Yeah, I think. I think you gotta, whether you're doing security monitoring via cameras in the enterprise or in your home, you have to be cognizant and basically do the threat modeling of what if an attacker would be able to gain access to this video feed. It's why, in my home, for example, bedrooms and bathrooms are off limits for any kind of camera device. And I do keep him in the basement, inside the house, inside the garage, because those are potentially easily accessible areas from someone who may gain physical access to my home.
Yep.
And that's the only place that I keep those, other than outside of my home as well, which I think many of us have. Home security systems. Tyler, I know you get a very elaborate home security system, primarily for the exterior of the home. When I get inside my home, it's really those areas where there's not a great privacy concern, right? It's not a bathroom, it's not a bedroom, and it's potentially more easily accessible than other areas of the home. For me, that's the garage, right? Because you got a garage door and a potentially a door on the side, right? An ingress on the side, and potentially an easy access. If someone does get in there, it's not the place where I'm sleeping or primarily residing within my home, right? To me, my basement falls into that area because it's a walkout. And if you're on the first floor or second floor, the basement, like someone could be down there. Like you wouldn't really know, right?
Yep. So for me, we do have cameras in each one of the kids' bedrooms. They are angled specifically to not cover the greater majority of the room.
Right. A specific
area. Like our oldest daughter has like a little reading nook. Where a bunch of pillows, you sit on the floor, she's a little TV and that type of stuff. It's kind of pointed to that so that we can tell if she's in the reading nook, and if she's in her room and her lights are on and she's in her bed, can't see the bed, but we can tell the lights are on and she's reading at midnight type of thing.
But also, I mean, we practice cybersecurity, right? We're updating the firmware. Yeah. We've got two-factor authentication. We're not giving access to the internet for our cameras, and also potentially we're monitoring for any unauthorized access to those camera feeds. That's not everyone in the world who has these monitoring devices that you can buy for dirt cheap that are manufactured in China, right? There's a big difference.
And that's the difference.
Yeah, and that, Tyler, that was exactly sort of when Lee brought this up where I wanted to go with this, that like I think one of Lee's initial comments when we were talking about this in Slack was, you stupid people, you need to know what you're putting on your network. And I would agree that there's a component of you're putting something on your network. You need to understand, what that really means. Where's that video going? How do you get access to it? And so forth.
I got one of those mirrored devices, like the workout mirrored devices. My wife wanted one because she wanted to work out in the house, and I was like, "That we got space for it. Like, it's a cool device. You want to work in the house? Totally support that." But like, I walk by it, and I'm basically like, "Hey, how you doing?" Like anyone who might have access to that device, like I don't trust that device.
She's been doing well. She's been working out every day.
You see it on Facebook, right? Or if you have access to the camera, you can see my wife working out, right? Like, but I'm like, that's just really creepy kind of thing. I'm like, I don't trust the mirror. I haven't done a full security assessment.
But see, she gets that little bead of sweat on the tip of her nose.
Right. But see, you had that initial reaction. It's like, I don't know if I trust it. I need to look into it. Many people will not. And I think Lee is partially right when he was saying this, that it's like you need to understand what the hell's on your network. Lee, I know you want to. You're making a comment. You're doing the hand thing.
No, I'm good.
But maybe it's not just a technical control either that we need to raise awareness about. That when the mirror is not in use, maybe there's just a cover that I put over it, right? So if someone does get access to the camera, they're not monitoring. Maybe they're monitoring when I'm working out, which is still kind of creepy, right? But there's other controls. I think the point is you need to have controls. You need to pay attention. And while we as security professionals, we do, but how do we get that out to everyone?
More importantly, and the spot where I wanted to go with this, given that I've been spending every waking hour that I haven't been at work developing the Sec 556 IoT pen test course for SANS 6-day course. I have been deep in IoT stuff for months and months. And it's not just up to the consumer to understand what the risk profile is. There has to be something at the vendor to have some commitment to the security, because I have ripped apart.
Oh, Larry, we wrote the book about WT54Gs. We were ripping them apart left and right, and we were like,
in the last month, I have ripped apart a firmware a day, and every single one of them is a shit show. Like while we were sitting here, right before I came to the podcast, I got stuff configured, and while we were sitting here on the show, I started ripping apart a set of QNX firmware for a VW Touareg in-dash entertainment system.
Interesting.
Shit show.
Interesting.
Shit show.
Interesting. My new car.
Yeah.
What's interesting is that when you car gets delivered to the dealership, right? I was talking about this on the break. Whenever it's delivered, the dealership isn't going into that car and configuring the car to pair with the Wi-Fi network so that the car can download the firmware update. Different story when there's a 4G or 5G connection in the car. It provides a hotspot. My devices inside the car can use that to communicate. Different from the car is a client pairing to a Wi-Fi network in order to download firmware updates. I took a picture of it downloading a tar GZ file to the car. I'm like, well, that's kind of interesting.
Do you have full network capture by chance?
Oh, God. And,
Because
other security researchers that may have the first name of Kevin also asked me the same question, and shamefully I did not. And I'm like, hopefully there's a new firmware update where I can actually capture that, right? Yeah.
Yeah, get instrumentation now, my friend. Instrumentation now.
From a consumer standpoint, though, and the general public, like outside of the security or even IT field, like we can put IT in there. The general consumer and general public have a certain level of expectation of security and privacy built into a lot of this, right? They have no understanding of insecurity and or expectation that when they buy a device, a car, or a camera that they're going to watch their kid from on their cell phone, like they think that's secure because it has a password or has some login, right?
Yep.
So do we hold?
I agree with you, Tyler. I wouldn't say expectation. I would say assumption. If at all. If at all. But go on.
Yeah, so do we hold the public? So this kind of goes back to the whole human aspect of, as we are securing enterprises and as we're trying to build in robust controls and trying to secure the human, yes, they're an important critical asset of every organization and should be educated, but relying specifically on the general public to do security in any manner or even think about it as a level of cognitive function, I think that's stepping beyond what we actually can reasonably expect or the general public will actually do. So at that point, does that mean that the manufacturers are then being held to the standard of making these better and at a cost of a higher priced device? Or how do we start to, like this thing with the kids, like I have no idea how there's not like 10 working groups or a level of cybersecurity vigilantes that have not went and like taken this stuff down and or hacked everybody in virtual reach of whatever this is. But
I think
seriously, this seems like a thing that should happen.
I think there's a parallel here, Tyler, and I'm not sure how to complete the parallel, but I think the parallel is, going back to the automotive industry. Cars didn't used to have seatbelts. And then eventually they had seatbelts. And then eventually you had a law that said you got to wear your seatbelt. And then we had airbags. And airbags were optional initially, and now they're pretty much standard. And airbags work better in conjunction with the use of seatbelts. I mean, they're designed to work together. And we assume, because it's the law, that people are wearing seatbelts, and now they pretty much have their airbags. I think that's the analogy. I just don't know how to carry it forward.
But yeah, the analogy falls down in cybersecurity, right? Maybe not so much the airbag, but the seatbelt, because you talk about enforcement. Because enforcement of the seatbelt is a human in the form of a police officer that's enforcing that you're wearing your seatbelt, right? Airbags are going to deploy regardless, and that's, I think, an analogy to automation and security built into the device. But a seatbelt is still an option, much like multi-factor authentication. So we can tell the user, wear your seatbelt, enable multi-factor authentication, but it's still up to the user whether or not they want to implement that control. Airbags are an example of a control that's going to be there whether you like it or not, right? And I think that's two different things.
No. You're right, Paul, but I think the analogy does continue to work. The police officer in the context of cybersecurity is something akin to compliance.
Yeah, agreed.
What is the police officer doing? He's giving you a ticket. He's imposing a fine.
A fine. Yeah, absolutely.
On you, and that's what the compliance regimens do. And it's the best we've got in society because we ultimately can't make anybody do anything that they don't want to do.
In cybersecurity, though, does the fine fall on the vendor or the fine fall on the user? Right? Because the fine for the police officer, he's not filing the claim with the automobile manufacturer. He's filing the claim with the user in that scenario. Much what we advocate in IoT security is the fine falling on the vendor, not the user.
Yep. Leah, a comment in there.
So I was thinking the analogy for me is that I don't think we can get. I mean, the nirvana with what we were trying to do with airbags and those seatbelts on the door was passive restraints. The user didn't have to actively engage. Remember when they had the seatbelts that would come down off the door and over you when you just closed the door?
I hated those.
You just sat in the car. I hated them too. And the same thing with the airbag. It's on whether you do anything or not. And yeah, they work better with the actively applied seatbelt. I get that. But so I mean, what can we get that's the passive is, a minimum configuration that's secure enough. I know that's a little bit nirvana. I get it. But that's I think where we want to get. There's been a lot of efforts the last couple of years to try and get legislative standards in place for IoT, and I don't know when that's, if ever, going to come to fruition,
or if it will work.
So let's run this analogy even further, because this is sort of fun in my brain, which is warped. I acknowledge that. So we want in IoT, we want to go after the vendors, but the vendors are the car manufacturers that either have a shoulder belt, seat belt that you have to put on yourself, or it's the automatic one built into the door that applies to you. I mean, what's the corollary there?
I'd argue that in some of the cases that the manufacturers have included seatbelts that are intentionally faulty and don't work. Or they didn't include seatbelts or airbags at all and claim that they have, or didn't even claim that they have. Or they've put in while they built the car, they put in some trigger so that whenever they wanted, they could disconnect your seatbelts and your airbags without you knowing.
Well, what's interesting, if you extrapolate that to IoT, what if the IoT device by default does not accept connections from anything outside of RFC 1918, and when it talks to the cloud and you log into your account, it's enforcing multi-factor authentication? That's, I think, akin to the seatbelt that automatically comes across you when you get in the car, right? Is that the level of protection that we need to secure IoT devices, Larry? To your course, right? Like that's an interesting question. I
think that's a component. Absolutely.
Same thing, I think, when you talk about building Docker containers.
Wait. To one more thing on that analogy, I'm really curious about what this thing Tyler's got with his fingers, because I'm wondering if he's practicing for the minivan. 2 up front, 5 in the back.
He is. He is.
No. 2 up front, 5 in the back. 2 up front, 5 in the back.
I did want to talk about my story.
Gotcha.
I don't know what number is it. Number 11, using nginx to customize control of your hosted app. They talk about nginx, Heroku. Go read the article. But when I came down to their Docker configuration, I think it comes back to this issue of trust that we've kind of flirted with on this segment, right? Basically, in their Docker file configuration, they have an add command, and after the add command, there's a URL, and they're saving that to a file. And Larry, you and I were talking about this, right?
Yes.
And just like a brief review of your Docker container, Docker file configuration. I'm like, if you've got an add command that's pulling down something automatically from a URL, saving that to a file, one of the things in here is an add command pulling down an installer, saving it to a PHP file, and executing that PHP. This, to me, is a huge red flag. Like, basically, you're pulling down code from the internet and automatically executing it without any safeguards or checks in place. At the very least, if you look at some of my container builds, I do use wget, not the add command, but a wget command to pull down a file, and I'm checking the checksum of that file as at least some stopgap measure to make sure I'm pulling down the correct file, unpacking that, and then executing commands. I think that's a sharp contrast from just pulling down a script from a URL and executing that every time your container builds.
It reminds me very much of the old WordPress plugin deal.
Yeah,
that you
pull
get
down someone else's code and executing it on a WordPress.
And more importantly, pull down this code from this hugely, amazingly popular WordPress plugin that has been compromised by a third party and had their backdoor code put in it. This is that same scenario that I see there.
It speaks to trust in how you build things that are built with integrity, rather than just blatantly trusting things that come off the internet. So be careful of that.
Yes.
Yeah. When you said, "Oh yeah, you can use the what? The get."
Add command.
The add command.
I actually didn't know you could use the add command in a Docker file and give it a URL, and it will
pull
that
something
file down and save it to whatever the next parameter is.
And your comment was, "Oh, it's saving it as a PHP." I'm like, "Holy, what the hell? No!"
Nothing could go wrong there.
Basically, you're executing arbitrary PHP code. What if someone were to take control of that PHP code? Now it's inside of your Docker container. That was my one kind of red flag when you're reading this. Now, to their credit, they do not execute this container as root right before their entry point. In the Docker file, they are dropping user privileges down to a regular user and not root, which is good. That's very good. We don't often see that in many Docker files that are available on Docker Hub.
What did you say right before what?
The entry point command. So when you in your Docker file,
sounds like a potential race condition.
It could, It basically speaks to the permissions that they're running the commands after. So basically, when you execute your user command, that's the user you're running as. In this case, not root. Then you run your entry point script, which is a script that will execute. That script is under the developer's control, conceivably. I mean, that would be really bad if you're pulling down a script from the internet. That is your entry point command, different story. Typically, your entry point script is something under developer control that's running, in this case, as a non-root user, which is good, best practice. It's the add command that I kind of wanted to caution people about.
Gotcha. Can I do one?
Yeah, please.
So it dropped shortly before we started broadcasting tonight. Krebs on Security posted an article that Dickey's Barbecue has been breached, and they think 3 million credit cards have been compromised. So PCI is still a thing.
Why are they holding
barbecue?
Drink.
Well,
how the hell are they holding 3 million credit cards?
Well,
good question.
That's a good question, and there's an answer to that, and it's complicated, and it has to do a lot. It has a lot to do with the fact that what credit card thieves, bad guys are going after more often than not these days are not the large retailers, but it's franchise operations, because Dickey Barbecues are franchised. So, collectively, you've got this huge brand, relatively speaking, that a lot of people know about that are in multiple states throughout the country. But individual stores tend to be small merchants. So the level of scrutiny of your level of PCI compliance is largely, it's ratcheted down because you're technically a small merchant, so you don't have to do the full-blown PCI. And because it's a franchise operation, and even though it's a recognized name brand, it happened, Paul, when you and I were at Tenable, Dairy Queen, I think it was, that was breached. What was fascinating, and I think Krebs was the one reporting on it. This is probably 5 years ago, when there was certain franchise Dairy Queens that were being targeted for and recognized as being victims of a breach. And whatever the reporters were, it might have been Krebs himself, contacted the corporate headquarters for Dairy Queen, and Dairy Queen initially said, "That's not us. We're corporate. That's
the franchise." But the franchises can, in gross violation of PCI, store the credit card numbers based on transactions, and that's what attackers are going after, right? Because that reminds me of like Max Vision that went after like pizza shops, and there was a pizza shop that he breached because they were a small merchant, didn't have a lot of the security in place, and he was able to get into the system, look at the database, and go, oh, great, there's, 50,000 credit card numbers in here. That's a good score for me today. To me, that's the exact situation that PCI was really designed to help protect us against, that there wasn't an easy way for attackers to gain that credit card information. And I think it goes beyond PCI in terms of what information is stored. Is it the CVV? Is it the Stripe information? And then we had chip and pin, which we can argue, but I think helped that situation, right? It kind of limited how the value of the information being stored.
Sort of. I mean, what you're saying is not completely untrue, but what's been more common for the last couple of years is the bad guys are targeting smaller organizations. They've developed different attack methodologies where they're no longer trying to break in and find the database of, the last 3 years worth of transactions that have all the credit card data.
They're patient and sniffing, right?
Well, Target, Home Depot, and many more since then are doing harvesting. You find these little guys that nobody's paying attention to because they're a little guy, and you can pick off memory scraping malware. Is what was being used at Target and Home Depot. Flying under the radar, collecting, a few hundred or a few thousand, but doing it at 10, 20, 50, 100 locations because nobody's paying attention to them because they're the little guys. It gets really complicated. And in theory, PCI covers it, but in practical application, because they're little guys, the scrutiny isn't there. And so there's a lot miss. Or they outsource to third parties that come in and say, hey, we got you covered, use our point of sale systems, we'll do all the processing for you, you're good, and doesn't necessarily cover all the basic security things that should be done, which is what at because that's the different level merchant, right, that would determine the scrutiny that they come under. The attackers they're basically poking holes in PCI that I think we can pretty easily remedy, right? If we look at this particular attack vector, we can probably increase the security of these. I don't know on the scale. Like a level 1 merchant is a larger merchant, right? Like a higher number level merchant is a smaller merchant, to help protect those organizations from these particular kinds of attacks. Yeah, and I use the term scrutiny specifically because on paper, when you read all the requirements, and the card brands are the ones that say, Visa, MasterCard, Amex, Discover, they say, if you're going to be a retailer and accept our card, you need to follow PCI. And on paper, no matter what level merchant you are, you're supposed to follow all of PCI. When I say scrutiny, what I mean is, are you having a third party coming in and doing an assessment of your compliance, or are you self-assessing with or without the help of somebody else? When PCI was established, it was designed to, the attack methodology back then was you actually broke into networks, you established a base camp, foothold, whatever you want to call it. You got shell, you rooted, you got admin rights to a server, and you pivoted and found the database that had all the transactions, and you figured out how to exfiltrate the data.
Right.
What changed was, the attacks now more often are, gas stations, notorious for doing skimming attacks against the devices themselves. But there's electronic skimming now of websites. There's harvesting of memory. We had the article earlier on that was talking about end-to-end encryption for Zoom. End-to-end encryption in terms of PCI means something very specific, and it's not acceptable in most circumstances. What PCI allows and what they certify is point-to-point encryption. The distinction being point-to-point encryption is requiring you to do the encryption in that device where you're swiping or tapping or sticking in your card, and it's happening in firmware, not in memory, not in memory on the cash register that's the computer, because that's where the memory scraping malware has been collecting everything. You can have end-to-end encryption, and the malware is capturing all the data before you run the encryption algorithm, and so on.
But this sounds like direct storage, right? Like 3 million credit cards sounds like not in memory. That sounds like direct storage. Direct storage credit card data. That,
it depends. I mean, what they don't say in the article is, well, actually, I think they did say somewhere in the article that it was like maybe I'm confusing my articles, that they're thinking that, well, Dickey's Barbecue had no idea that was happening. They had, law enforcement and the card brand say, hey, we're seeing fraud taking place, and all the indicators point to your stores, what's called the point of interaction, where we see all these different cards and where people have been using this card, Dickey's Barbecue, and
I think it warrants a whole segment, right? Is the Dickey's Barbecue as an example? Are they a chip or is it a mag stripe? Because there's differences in terms of when you're talking about encryption, right, and the effectiveness of the data that you're able to glean wherever you are in that kind of cycle of how you're processing the credit card. I think that deserves a segment almost in and of itself, Jeff, in terms of the protections that are in place, because we all visit different retailers. And so I go to the Halloween store as an example. It was only a mag stripe at the Halloween store. When I go to even a retailer, a small retailer in New England, we're in the fall time frame, right? We go to the different apple farms and we're doing apple picking and pumpkin picking and all things like that.
And now so much of it is no contact, so it's cards and coin shortage,
COVID, but it's also they've got a stripe reader that's a chip reader, and that's distanced from the cashier, so that and I think it's nice in times of COVID that I have my card, I can put it in the chip reader and take it out when the transaction's done. They're like, yeah, no signature, no receipt, like you're good. I don't have to touch anything but my card. So these really small farms that are very seasonal based are, I think, pretty advanced in the fact that it's a chip reader and I go in. But the Halloween store, again, talking about the seasonal transactions, they were a mag stripe reader. I'm like, that's right. There's a lot of differences there, right? That I think deserves some digging into.
I'm more than happy to do a whole segment on it sometime, because it is complicated and there's a lot of confusion. I've had plenty of arguments with people that are supposedly experts, and they're like, oh, yeah, I never thought of that. The article did say somewhere they think that this compromise of Dickey's has occurred over a 13 to 15-month period.
Sure.
So 3 million cards over a year. It could be memory scraping, malware. It could be any number of things. And they don't have the details yet because they just dropped this announcement, other than to say, "Oh, Dickey's has been breached."
Yeah, I think we underestimate the number of transactions that flow through a merchant, right? Even if it's a small merchant. Like, I know there's, for example, restaurants in Rhode Island, small local restaurants, and you're like, wait a minute. I'm hearing their revenue numbers in the millions of dollars, right? Like, it's a small restaurant. And you think of the number of credit card transactions, but that also dictates your level of merchant in PCI, Jeff, right? The number of transactions.
Level of merchant is specifically volume of transactions and whether it's card present, brick and mortar, or e-commerce, or an e-commerce, which is card not present. Absolutely. I'm happy to do a segment on it anytime you want.
A question for everybody. Has anybody gone to a gas pump, and had it use the chip in function on your credit card?
Yes. More and more commonly. Yes. Great point.
Yes. And in fact, the first time I did it, I was like, what? No, give me my card. Oh,
wait. It's a chip reader.
It's a chip reader because it holds onto it.
And I even now, and it's probably been 2 years now, and time is a blur because of COVID, but my ATM that I use at my credit union, which is a federal credit union, affiliated with a certain DoD agency.
Sure.
They've got a chip reader now for the ATM card.
Yeah.
Now, ATMs and gas stations, they were exempt from the switch over to using a chip card, which was back in I think it was 2016 or 17.
Yeah,
it was 17, where everything was. But even then, it was, the carrot for the retailers was, you're not going to be subject to fines if you're compromised, if you're using the chip cards. But if you're not using the chip card readers and you're breached, woe is you. And there also was incentives built in terms of the charges, the rates that they had to pay for each transaction. Yep. So it was an incentive, kind of like an e-commerce site. If sometimes you'll enter your credit card number expiration, sometimes they ask for the security code, sometimes they don't. I mean, that is tied more closely, even though it's a security feature, that's tied more closely in terms of whether retailers use it or not, in terms of the rates they get, which is how much they're paying for the privilege of accepting your card. And it's typically either a percentage of the transaction or it's a specific fraction of a dollar amount, a cents amount based on every transaction.
I probably have a couple of dozen retailers that I've switched credit cards on. Obviously, Security Weekly underwent an acquisition, right? And we had to switch a lot of our accounts over. And it was amazing to me as a security professional, the variance between what they were asking for, right? Some merchants required a phone number. I'm not sure what the phone number was, who's the name on the card, versus, they all required the number, the expiration date, and the CVV. But then there's a lot of other information they would also may require or not, and that depended on the merchant, which is why, another reason why, Jeff, I think it deserves a segment in of itself to talk about what the protections are, what the attacks are, and things like that. I think it's very interesting.
With that,
it's complicated. Hey, just a shameless plug. In my news stories, I put up that I'm doing 2 virtual conferences next week. One is I was invited by SPAF to speak at Sirius at Purdue.
Oh, awesome! Congrats.
Thank you. And I'm sharing it simply because because it's all virtual, they've made it open to the public, so anybody can, not just mine, but it's a whole seminar series. I think they have speakers every week. You can sign up and listen to the Sirius security seminar series, as well as Lee. I should have been hanging out at your house, but I'm speaking virtually at the Boise ISSA Information Security Conference next week.
We'll still be raising a toast to you during your talk.
There were some somewhat nation-state politically charged articles that were out there. Robert Graham, yes, we can validate leaked emails. If you've been following politics, that plays into it. Also, Iran acknowledges cyber attacks on government departments. And there was a hacker who helped ISIS, who will remain in a U.S. prison. Kind of an interesting story to follow. I won't go into depth on those because we're going to wrap it up, but certainly worth a look. Also, interesting, Microsoft Security Response Center posted an article on the security analysis of Sherry, which is an academic kind of project that's focused around memory protections, and Microsoft tested it. So all good articles for you to go read on wiki.securityweekly.com. Thank you, everyone, for listening and watching. Thank you, everyone, for participating in the show tonight. Larry, take us out.
Over and out.